An empire can be too large to lose slowly. In 331 BC, the most expansive state in the Near East did not collapse because it lacked soldiers, wealth, or history. It collapsed because one king understood a harsher law of power: when command cannot move as fast as danger, size becomes a trap. Gaugamela was the day Persia discovered that magnificence and resilience are not the same thing. By the time Alexander of Macedon approached the plains near Gaugamela, the Achaemenid Empire remained one of the most formidable political creations in human history. This was not a dying shell waiting for a final push. It was an imperial system forged over generations, a structure of taxation, roads, satrapies, garrisons, treasuries, and royal prestige stretching from the Aegean fringe to the interior of Asia. It could gather revenue from many climates, languages, and peoples. It could project splendor with an authority so old and so immense that entire regions had long accepted Persian supremacy as one of the fixed facts of civilized life. That is precisely what makes Gaugamela so important. The battle was not merely the defeat of an army. It was the exposure of a structural weakness hidden inside imperial greatness. Persia possessed reach on a continental scale, but that same scale imposed a terrible burden in war. The empire could summon many contingents, but summoning is not the same as integrating. It could command loyalty, but loyalty under pressure is not the same as coordinated response. It could gather an immense host, but an immense host under strain becomes a problem of time, communication, and political trust. The old myth says Alexander won because Persia had become decadent and hollow. That explanation is too simple to be serious. The Persian Empire had suffered defeats, yes, but it still retained enormous capacity. It still fielded cavalry of great quality, still commanded treasure vast enough to finance continued resistance, and still possessed the symbolic legitimacy of the great king. But after Issus in 333 BC, the political geometry of the war began to change. Alexander had shattered the aura of Persian invincibility in a direct confrontation. Then came Tyre and Gaza in 332 BC, followed by Egypt. These were not random triumphs gathered for glory alone. They formed a strategic program. Alexander was removing Persia's maritime perimeter, severing its economic and naval edge along the eastern Mediterranean, and converting a punitive expedition into a campaign for universal monarchy. Darius III understood the stakes, even if ancient narratives often reduce him to a fleeing figure. For Darius, this was no longer a contest over a frontier or a rebellious Greek king. It was a struggle to preserve the legitimacy of the throne itself. Imperial politics is often crueler than open battle. A ruler can lose territory and survive. But once satraps begin asking whether the center can still protect them, loyalty becomes conditional. Once nobles begin calculating survival rather than victory, the state enters a zone of invisible fracture. Darius therefore needed more than resistance. He needed a vindicating spectacle. He needed a battle that would publicly reverse humiliation, reassure the aristocracy, and restore confidence in the monarchy's ability to command fate. Here the deeper paradox appears. Persia's strength and peace had always been its breadth. It governed diversity at scale. It absorbed local elites into a larger imperial framework and converted distance into tribute. But war punishes slow concentration. War rewards systems that can identify the decisive point and overwhelm it before the enemy fully understands the pattern. Alexander excelled at exactly this form of compression. He was a commander of concentrated crises. Speed of march, concentration of force, initiative seized before hesitation spread, and personal presence at the point of rupture, these were not merely habits of temperament. They were the operating principles of a man who understood that smaller powers survive by making larger powers react too late. This is why Gaugamela must not be seen as an isolated encounter. It was the culmination of accumulated pressure. Alexander had already forced Persia into strategic retreat around the Mediterranean. Darius had already experienced the cost of direct defeat. Both rulers entered the coming battle with immense burdens. Alexander needed finality. Darius needed redemption. One sought the inheritance of empire. The other sought to prove that empire remained indivisible. The chosen battlefield reflected that tension. Darius selected ground near Gaugamela and had parts of it leveled to favor his cavalry and the deployment of scythed chariots. This was not foolish theater, though later victors would make it seem so. It was an intelligent attempt to convert Persian advantages into tactical fact. If the plain allowed cavalry freedom of movement and if the scythed chariots could disorder the Macedonian line, then a numerically broader force might envelop and destroy the invader. On paper, this was sound reasoning. But war is governed not only by the assets present. It is governed by the terms under which those assets are forced to operate. A battlefield can be prepared. But a battlefield can also be redefined. Ancient sources, of course, exaggerated numbers with their customary appetite for all. Some portray Persian hosts so vast that arithmetic itself begins to protest. Modern estimates are more restrained and more honest. Exact totals remain debated. But the large truth does not depend on impossible precision. Alexander faced a significantly larger force. The asymmetry was real. Yet another asymmetry mattered more. The Persian army was broader in manpower. The Macedonian army was superior in command agility. That distinction is the heart of the entire event. A great many soldiers do not create a great many options unless they can be directed with speed and mutual confidence. Alexander's army, forged through campaign after campaign, possessed a habit of coordinated violence. Infantry, cavalry, skirmishers, reserves, and command structure could act not as adjacent parts but as responsive instruments. Darius commanded many peoples, many languages, many traditions of fighting, and many aristocratic expectations. Such diversity can be a source of resilience in administration. In battle, under sudden stress, it can become a source of delay. Alexander's central idea was both simple and brilliant: refused to be smothered by width. If the Persians wanted to use their numbers to envelop, then the Macedonians must manipulate that width into instability. Rather than driving immediately into the strongest part of the Persian line, Alexander moved obliquely to the right. This was not evasive wandering. It was a calculated effort to pull the Persian formation laterally, to force Darius to extend and shift, and thereby to create dislocation between masses that looked unified from afar. It was geometry turned into strategy. The larger army, if made to mirror the movement, would have to solve multiple problems at once. It would need to guard against outflanking. It would need to preserve cohesion across a broader front. It would need to maintain alignment while reacting under pressure. Every rational response imposed new strain. That is the cruelty of superior maneuver: it punishes the enemy for behaving sensibly. Darius, meanwhile, carried a burden more political than military. He could not merely survive Alexander's assault. He had to destroy him in full view of the empire. An inconclusive result would not heal the authority of the great king. Prestige at this level does not recover through ambiguity. The Persian monarchy needed a visible, unquestionable triumph. Therefore Darius's strategic freedom was narrower than it appeared. He had to stand, display confidence, and command a battle plan worthy of imperial grandeur. Alexander's own plan was hardly without risk. The left wing under Parmenion would absorb severe pressure. The decision to seek breakthrough on one axis meant accepting danger on another. This is often how great victories begin, not with universal safety, but with disciplined exposure to peril. A commander cannot dominate every point at once. The art lies in deciding where temporary danger can be endured in order to create irreversible decision elsewhere. As the battle opened, the field did not descend immediately into meaningless chaos. It became a contest of calculation under mounting pressure. Alexander advanced in such a way as to continue pulling the Persian line laterally. The movement was provocative by design. It threatened position without yet delivering the final blow. Darius responded as many competent commanders would respond. To avoid being outflanked, Persian forces extended and shifted. Yet every extension threatened cohesion. Every adjustment increased the burden on communication and mutual timing. The empire's great host was being compelled to answer too many questions too quickly. The preparatory advantage of the level terrain and the scythed chariots now confronted a brutal limitation. Such advantages matter only if the enemy accepts battle on the terms for which the field was prepared. Alexander did not. He manipulated angle, pace, and spacing. He disrupted the utility of what Darius had built before the Persians could fully cash in its value. Preparation had produced rigidity. Adaptation was now deciding the day. Here one encounters a recurring law of strategy. Strength ceases to be strength when it can function only under ideal conditions. The more a system depends on the enemy behaving predictably, the more vulnerable it becomes to a commander who treats predictability itself as the target. Then came the hinge of the battle. Somewhere amid the Persian redeployments, a seam emerged in the center, a gap, or at minimum a vulnerable thinning created by movement and reaction. Alexander saw it with the speed that defines great battlefield command. He did not attack the entire Persian mass. He attacked the decisive weakness within it. With the companion cavalry in wedge formation, he drove toward the critical point, and beyond that point toward the figure whose presence held the political logic of the army together, Darius himself. This charge is often remembered as a feat of personal bravery. It was that, but bravery alone explains little. The deeper significance was operational and psychological. Alexander was striking not simply at troops, but at the command nucleus of an imperial coalition whose battlefield unity depended heavily on the visible steadiness of the great king. The Persian Empire could mobilize thousands. But in the crisis of battle, legitimacy remained intensely embodied. So long as Darius stood, order could still be imagined. If Darius broke, the imagination of order would break with him. This is why the charge toward the king carried more weight than a mere tactical penetration. It transformed local rupture into systemic threat. The men around Darius were not only guarding a person. They were guarding continuity, authority, and the symbolic center of the empire in motion. Yet Gaugamela was not the effortless masterpiece that later legend prefers. While Alexander drove toward the Persian center, the Macedonian left under Parmenion faced severe pressure. Persian forces pressed hard there. The risk Alexander had accepted at the outset became real in the most dangerous sense. Parts of the Macedonian line were near crisis. Appeals for support were not fantasies invented later to dramatize the event. They reveal something essential about the fog of war. A victory can be born while failure remains possible on another sector of the same field. This matters because it restores contingency to the story. Alexander did not solve Gaugamela like a mathematician solving a proof from a safe distance. He imposed a plan whose success depended on time, discipline, and nerve holding together under simultaneous stress. Had the left collapsed too soon, had the seam in the center proved less exploitable, had Persian coordination endured a little longer, the outcome might have become murkier and bloodier than triumphal histories admit. Great commanders are not those who eliminate uncertainty. They are those who wager correctly inside it. Darius now faced the defining moment. With Alexander's thrust threatening the center and his own position endangered, the king withdrew. Whether interpreted as panic, prudence, or the instinct to preserve the monarchy for a later stand, the effect was immediate and devastating. In a modern military system with deeply institutionalized command, an army can continue coherent action after a leader retreats or falls. But the Achaemenid army at Gaugamela was not such a machine. It was a multinational force politically glued together by royal legitimacy. Once the great king withdrew, what had been an immense army became, with terrible speed, an immense collection of contingents exposed to isolation. This was the true breaking point. Not the first charge. Not the first casualties. But the moment visible authority moved backward and men everywhere understood what that movement meant. Whatever resistance remained, the political battle was over. The Persian army still contained fighting men. Persia still contained resources. But the central fiction necessary for immediate cohesion, that the king remained fixed at the heart of command, had been punctured in plain sight. Alexander had achieved something larger than battlefield success. He had translated movement into panic faster than Persia could translate manpower into control. That is the essential thesis of Gaugamela. The smaller force did not need to destroy every enemy formation in sequence. It needed to create a crisis of confidence at the exact point where command, symbol, and fear converged. The aftermath reveals how empires truly fall. Gaugamela did not erase Persia in a single afternoon as though a civilization simply vanished when the dust settled. Empires die administratively after they die psychologically. The battle broke the strategic spine of the Achaemenid state. Babylon, Susa, and eventually Persepolis would fall not only because roads were open, but because legitimacy had begun to migrate. Elites, city authorities, and satraps did not need every Persian army annihilated before reconsidering allegiance. They needed proof that the great king could no longer guarantee order. Gaugamela supplied that proof with merciless clarity. Once imperial subjects suspect that the center can no longer protect wealth, law, and rank, the rational instinct is no longer heroic loyalty. It is accommodation to the coming order. History often describes such decisions as betrayal. More often they are strategic realism by local powers who understand that survival depends on recognizing when sovereignty has already changed hands in principle, even if not yet in ceremony. Alexander grasped this with unusual sophistication. After Gaugamela, the campaign ceased to be merely Macedonian conquest of Persian lands. It became the appropriation of imperial sovereignty itself. Treasure, capitals, roads, satrapal structures, and ceremonial authority were not incidental prizes. They were the machinery through which conquest could become rulership. Alexander did not merely open roads eastward. He stepped into an administrative inheritance built by the very empire he had broken. Here lies another irony worthy of history's darker humor. The conqueror who defeated Persia did so not by rejecting empire as a model, but by mastering its logic more decisively than its reigning dynasty could in that final crisis. He would increasingly present himself not simply as destroyer, but as heir. The battle therefore marks not only the fall of one order, but the transfer of its universal claim. But what, in the deepest sense, died at Gaugamela? An army was broken, certainly. A dynasty was mortally wounded. Yet something broader was exposed, the fragility of overcentralized power. Empires often look strongest at the center of their maps and weakest at the center of their decision-making. When legitimacy, morale, and command all depend too heavily on one visible individual, then one moment of hesitation can radiate outward like structural collapse through stone that had seemed eternal. Darius did not lose because he lacked courage in some theatrical moral sense, nor because Persia was fated to fall the moment Alexander crossed into Asia. He lost because the system he represented had become strategically vulnerable to a kind of war that compressed time faster than imperial coordination could bear. Possession was mistaken for control. Scale was mistaken for resilience. Spectacle was mistaken for strategy. These are not ancient errors only. They are permanent temptations of power. Human beings and institutions repeatedly make the same category mistake. They count assets and assume they have counted strength. They measure territory and assume they have measured authority. They gather impressive coalitions and assume those coalitions will remain coherent at the moment of maximum fear. But history offers a sterner accounting. Power is not merely what can be assembled. Power is what can be directed at the decisive second. This is why Gaugamela still feels modern. Every age produces systems so large that they begin to confuse bureaucracy with control. States, corporations, alliances, and political orders often appear invulnerable because their ledgers are full, their reach is broad, and their symbolism is grand. But if adaptation slows, if command becomes ceremonial, if institutions require ideal conditions before they can respond effectively, then a flexible rival can transform agility into an existential weapon. The battle speaks not only to kings and armies, but to the deeper architecture of organized human life. Overcentralized systems function magnificently until reality changes faster than instructions can travel. At that moment, the very hierarchy that once produced order begins producing paralysis. Subordinates wait for confirmation. Peripheral actors protect themselves. Communication lags. The center hesitates. Then the appearance of strength remains for a time, but the substance has already begun to drain away. Alexander's genius was not mystical. It was the relentless exploitation of this truth. He understood that if an opponent's scale could be forced into reactive motion, then breadth would cease to be an advantage and become a burden. He understood that morale is a strategic resource, not an emotional accessory. He understood that striking the command nucleus can disorganize a system more completely than grinding down its edges. Above all, he understood that initiative is not simply acting first. It is defining the pattern to which everyone else must submit. The verdict, then, is severe. Gaugamela broke the Achaemenid Empire not because Persia lacked greatness, but because its greatness had become difficult to direct under concentrated shock. The battle destroyed the political credibility of Darius III, opened the imperial capitals to Alexander, and transformed a campaign of invasion into a transfer of sovereignty. The cost was not merely counted in dead and routed men. It was counted in the extinction of a dynasty's claim to inevitability. Once that claim died, the empire's outer obedience could no longer be trusted to hold. The modern mirror is equally sobering. Human societies still reward scale, pageantry, and vast administrative reach. Yet the lesson of Gaugamela is that these things can conceal internal brittleness. Institutions become dangerous to themselves when they centralize prestige so heavily that one visible failure becomes contagious. Leaders become trapped when they require theatrical victory and therefore lose the freedom to adapt. Rivals become lethal when they understand that the fastest path to triumph is not always the destruction of every enemy asset, but the disruption of the enemy's ability to coordinate belief. In every century, power asks the same question: how much can be gathered? History answers with a different one: how much can still be controlled when the plan fails? That is why the plains of 331 BC continue to echo far beyond antiquity. Gaugamela endures because it reveals a timeless pattern in human affairs. Systems fall apart first in confidence, then in command, and only afterward in territory. Men often notice the final stage and call it sudden. Historians, looking harder, recognize the earlier fracture, the moment when one side moved faster than the other side could think. The legacy question remains, and it cannot be solved by a list of dates or names. When a civilization becomes vast enough to command continents, what truly protects it, the scale of its resources, or the speed with which truth can travel from danger to decision? In that question rests not only the fate of Persia, but the silent vulnerability of every power that mistakes magnitude for mastery.